I just want to welcome everyone to this event, this game-changing event on how insight has transformed the way that we work. And I want to start by just acknowledging where I am. I'm on the lands that have been stewarded by the Lekwungen and Quisepsum people for thousands of years and who continue to look after the land and live in relationship with the land. And so I acknowledge that because it's unceded, there's been no treaties, and that there's a really a sense of responsibility and some kind of accountability that I feel for being here as an uninvited guest. And then a lot of gratitude for the land itself, for just the trees and the water that comes out of the sky. And we've had these atmospheric river events. And so I'm just sort of very aware of the difficult times that we're in, and also the way that nature kind of will continue on and rebalance, and that that it sort of calls for me about like where we can be human resilience and tell stories in a different way and innovate in with more capacity. So it feels to me like this is a really wonderful time for insight to help with these different stories and these different ways of engaging with each other. And that as we tell these stories to each other about how insight is changing the way that we're living or working, that that those stories will start other stories. And so that's sort of the power of storytelling, and one of the reasons that we're here. So I get to invite our two starting storytellers, um, Sabina Smith and Sarah Wharton, and I have had just the joy of knowing both of them for many years in different ways. So Sabina is a graduate of the Conflict Analysis and Management program at Royal Roads, and so she has connected with Megan for a long time now on insight policing. And Sabina is the senior bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Whistler, BC, which is well, it was where the Winter Olympics were hosted in 2010, amongst other places. So it's a ski town and a summer condo town. There's sort of lots of nature and biking and all kinds of. It's a really wonderful, gorgeous place. And Sarah Wharton is based in New York, and I've known Sarah since I went to some workshops that Viev and Jamie were hosting on, that Viev had started with Insight Artists for Global and Social Change. And Sarah's been involved with Insight Artistry even before that. So for many years, over eight, we were thinking back, so through the private theater. So Sarah is a multi-hyphenate artist, which means like there's all these things that she's so good at with acting and writing and producing and storytelling and all the other things that come with producing the art that she loves around directing and organizing. So there's just so many things that I've come to really appreciate about Sarah, as well as being just a really gifted storyteller and actor. So, and you have seen the bios for them both. So I've had a conversation to talk with each of them, both of us together, or all three of us together, just before the session. And so they're just going to tell a story of how Insight has really changed. Using Insight has changed the way that they've interacted or done in their work. And then we'll have a little conversation about that. And then if you also want to ask questions or engage on those stories, and then we'll just open this up to a circle of stories. And so that where if you want to share a story of something that came to mind as you listen to them, to do that and then pass that on to the next person, so that and if you don't want to share, then you can just say pass and pass it on to the next person. So in that way, we create a circle in this time as we're also heading towards solstice. And I think of that as us kind of gathering around a kind of the warmth of story to just be together in this time of increasing darkness. So we didn't actually talk about who would like to go first between Sarah and Sabina. So is one of you move to start? Okay, lovely. So Sabina, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. So I'm currently working as a bylaw enforcement officer in Whistler. And throughout the years, the past 10 years, bylaw officers have been tasked with more lower level policing calls. And we traditionally don't have any use of force options and no protective gear like police officers do. So it's just really resonated with me how important it is for bylaw officers, especially to really master their interpersonal and conflict management skills with the public. And I've been like utilizing insight has been imperative to my success in conflict management. And I think a large part of that success comes from the curiosity component that's embedded in insight. I found that traditionally law enforcement personnel are they're trained to be fairly incurious when carrying out their duties. And since I've been utilizing the insight approach, my experience has shown me that instead, when curiosity is employed, people are so pleasantly surprised, and you meet them on this very human and relational level that they're not used to. And I think this relational level is being lost in our society these days. So this shock factor and this surprise, I see it so often when I utilize insight, when I just take a second to say, tell me about it. Tell me what you're thinking. What is upsetting about that? So an example that I thought of recently, it happened this past week, and it's a very like rudimentary basic example of insight, but lots of visitors coming through Whistler, and I work out of the municipal hall. So this past week, a man came in and he had received a parking ticket on his vehicle. And he was talking to the front desk staff, very upset that he had received this parking ticket, and he requested to talk to somebody about it. So of course, I was called to come out and talk to him in the lobby of Municipal Hall about this parking ticket that he had received. So I searched the citation number before I went out. I saw the pictures. I understood what he received the parking ticket for. And it was because he was an oversized vehicle parked over 2 parking stalls, which is not permitted. There's an oversized section where these vehicles should be parked. So I printed out the picture and I walked out. And then I introduced myself and I said, I've got the officer's pictures here of your vehicle. And he said, I know you're just going to tell me that I shouldn't have parked there. And he just rolled his eyes. And I immediately recognized this as conflict behavior. And I began utilizing insight right after that. So I wanted to verify that what I had noticed is actually true. And so I said, you seem really frustrated by this ticket. And he said, I'm really frustrated by this. And I said, I want to hear from you. Like, what's so frustrating about this parking ticket? And he was, in that moment, I could totally see his demeanor change. Like the fact that I wasn't just going to say, you can't park there. This is what you have to do to rectify it. Go park somewhere else. This is where you can park. And instead I utilized, I want to understand what's patterning this behavior. I want to understand your threats here. Tell me about it. I want to have a conversation with you about this frustration. So I could just see he took a moment and he said, okay, what am I frustrated about here? And he immediately, he revealed to me what was patterning his conflict behavior. And so number one, it was the fact that the parking officer who gave him the ticket didn't bother to have a conversation with him because he was in the vehicle when the parking ticket was issued. He thought that public servants should take more time to talk to people instead of just giving them parking tickets right off the bat. And number two, he told me that he actually lives in that vehicle and he can't afford to be getting these parking tickets every day. So by becoming curious, I was really able to understand exactly why this person was upset. And so I repeated back to him, okay, you're upset because you wanted that parking officer to talk to you. And secondly, this is a practical threat for you. You need a place to stay because this is your home. And so I repeated back to him his 2 threats. And because I got curious about his initial valuing and I paraphrased his threats and concerns, I not only made him feel heard and understood, which made him more willing to listen to my instructions for disputing this ticket, but I also learned a new piece of information, which was that he was living in his vehicle and was able to let him know that there's actually a designated spot for people who live in their vehicles that's free for up to 14 days. So if I had never gotten curious, I would have never found that information out and come up with a resolution to this issue. And he might have left the municipal hall more frustrated than before if I had not elicited those nuggets or those threats from him. So that's my story of how I utilize insight day in and day out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sabina. Thank you for that. And over to you, Sarah.
I just have to say that was such a great story, Sabina. Thank you.
Yes, and so beautifully told, like so clear about what was happening in each moment and how you were able to really recognize what was happening and respond. Super useful. So as Marnie mentioned, I work in film production, and movie sets traditionally are not environments that welcome a lot of questioning. They don't really provide a lot of time for things. We use military language when we're on set, and they can feel very chaotic and aggressive, and everything comes down to time at the end of the day. Everyone's always worried that we're not going to get the shot in time, that we're going to have to spend more money that we don't have. And even though it's just storytelling, it's not actually war. I think because of the language and because of the culture around it, frequently it can feel that way. And people take it very seriously, and it always feels like the stakes are very, very high. So I was working on a film that was independent, low budget. So we were trying to pull off sort of a big thing, big action scenes, try to make the movie look like it was a much bigger deal than it actually was. So it had been a really difficult shoot in a lot of ways because we were really asking people to go above and beyond. And I myself was wearing multiple hats. I was producing and acting, and everyone who was working on the crew was like filling in any way that they could, doing lots and lots of things at the same time. And towards the end of the shoot, everyone was tired, but we were almost at the end. We just had like 2 more days left, and we were shooting on a soundstage in New York. And it was kind of a chaotic day because we were trying to do like 3 things at one time. There was a photo shoot going on in one section of the soundstage. There was like actual film shooting happening on another section. And then I had been assigned to do behind the scene interviews with all of the cast. And there had been a miscommunication with the other lead producer about what was happening when and where. And essentially, she told me that I couldn't do the behind the scene interviews that I needed to do because it was going to take up too much time and space, and it was going to be a conflict with some of the other work that was going on. And so I tried to offer some options because I didn't have another option to do these interviews. It sort of had to happen on that day. And eventually I felt like we had come to an understanding that I would just do it when we were like, when the shooting wasn't happening, I would just do it in between. But she didn't feel like that was a good solution and was furious with me. And it sort of translated into her being furious with the director and angry at some of the other cast members. And we left that day feeling bad. It just felt like bad communication between collaborators. And going into the next day of shooting, I was really sort of worried about personalities clashing and this conflict sort of like bleeding into the rest of the shoot. So she sent me an email that was pretty aggressive and sort of like laying out all of the things that she thought that I had done incorrectly. And my initial response to that was to want to tell her why that was wrong. I wanted to tell her that, like, no, this is why this had to happen this way. And I checked with you first. And I sort of was like going through in my head all of these, like, well, but that's wrong. And this is why, and I'm right. And you shouldn't be angry at me because I'm right. And I was just noticing my own conflict behavior, like, really rising in that moment. And because of insight, I took a moment to slow down and ask myself, okay, what am I really going for here? What do I want tomorrow when we go back to set? What do I want to happen? And what are my options in order to make that possible? And as I was thinking about it, I was like, I think that all of this sort of like accusing each other of who's wrong and who's right doesn't actually matter, because the day is done. We can't go back and fix any of that. What I really want is for tomorrow, our last day of shooting, to feel good and collaborative and easy, and to end this shoot on a good note. And so because I was able to sort of really key into what I hoped for, I realized that what I really needed to do was attend to the relationship, not to the information of what was going on. So in response to her email, I just said, are you okay? Like, is there, how are you? And we talked, and that question, that very simple question of just sort of shifting the attention to her and what was going on for her internally instead of focusing on the work, was really transformative, because she was able to say, I'm not okay. I'm really stressed out because of all of these other things that have happened, not just yesterday. I feel like in general, I'm being disrespected and not listened to. I feel very unsupported. I'm very tired. I'm not okay. And after being able to hear that from her, then I could say, okay, as your teammate, what can I do to support you? What's going to make you feel tomorrow like you are supported, like people have your back? Do you need to take a few extra hours in the morning to rest? Like, whatever it is that you need, we can make that happen. And so we were able to have a conversation about the best way to support her and the best way to like really land our last day on set. And if it hadn't, I think, been for insight, I would have just continued in my own conflict behavior, which would have triggered her conflict behavior more, and we would have had a shitty last day.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, for that story. Yeah. And so in the conversation, what I see is just the sort of the richness of the being able to ask about someone else on your own terms, also being able to recognize what is your own threats and your own conflict behavior, then to be able to again ask somebody a question of curiosity directed towards them, for them to reflect upon what matters to them. And so then I'm wondering now if there's other stories that have come to mind, or other questions or observations that have come to mind from hearing these two stories. And I'm going to just pick somebody, and then you can reflect, share, and then pass that on to somebody else. How does that sound for a process? Again, if you want to pass, just feel free. Okay. So Ken, you're right to my right. So I'm going to just open this up for you to start.
I'm struck in both examples, Sarah and Sabina, that there's the implementing the insight approach resulted in you being able to be generous in a way that had you not done it, had you not implemented it, you wouldn't have been, I don't know whether you wouldn't have been inclined to, or you would have been blocked or whatever. But and by generous, I don't mean generous in the sense of giving up on yourself, because it seemed to me that there was an important amount of paying attention to yourself that had to be done first in order to kind of delink threats in your own responding. But when you're able to do that, you're able to kind of focus on the other person in a way that is in fact a kind of generosity. I don't know whether that strikes you as something that you intended to do, or is that something that I'm observing, or am I missing something?
I think that's right. I don't think that I would have recognized that had you not pointed it out, but that feels right, that a part of that moment of slowing down and being curious is allowing space for generosity. And that's a really lovely way to think about that moment of expansion.
Sabina, I noticed the same thing in your story. And again, a law enforcement officer isn't generally taught to be generous, but that there's something in the way that you were able to pay attention to your own responses. Anyway, that's and it's funny because if I would have said to you, either of you, okay, now in that situation, I want you to be generous by doing this instead of that, you wouldn't have been able to do what you did either. And what you had to be trained to do is what you were trained to do by your insight instructors. But the net result is, but I hadn't thought of it in those terms before.
And Ken, was there a story that came to mind for you that resonates with either of those stories, or adds another dimension of that around generosity that came through using an insight approach?
Me personally?
Yeah. And you can think about that if you want to. If there's something comes to mind, we can come back.
Sure.
Okay.
I will.
Because so Ken's word is generosity, some other one else might be another one. And what came to mind for me is that difference from a clash of positions to an encounter of persons. And both of your stories really showed that so beautifully as well. So Ken, would you like to just name somebody else who can then share, reflect, ask, and pass along?
Allison.
Thanks, Ken. I think what's come up for me from the stories, and I loved how Sarah said tending to relations or relationship. I don't know which word you used, but that landed on me in a it felt like the right word, and I feel like that's often what this is what the work is. We're putting the focus on the relation, and that's how I think how maybe I also think about insight. In terms of a specific story, I don't think there's not one that comes to mind, but I think I look back over the last 10 years of my work with insight, and I think also that I feel that I have the space to be more generous. That I didn't have that before, and it didn't come. I don't think it didn't come right away, and there's still a long way that I could go as well. I'm not there yet. And maybe just the one story, I had a conflict with a group of friends recently. We had a getaway, a group of us. We've been meeting for many years. We've known each other since public school, since kindergarten, in fact. And for the last decade, we've been meeting annually, except for, of course, the last couple of years. And we had a meetup recently, and we left somebody off of the list, off the invitation list. And this is somebody who hadn't joined us over the last 10 years. We usually invite her, but she never comes. Something else is going on in her life, and she found out about it, and she was very angry with us. And And so her message came in. She wrote a fairly aggressive message. Her husband wrote us secretly a message. It felt like we were all pulled back into public school. Like it was really just it's fascinating how we all went from 50 somethings back to 8, 9, 10-year-olds who actually, I think I should give them more credit, because in many ways they can be much more generous than we were. And I didn't get sucked into it. Like I didn't get sucked into the story and what was going on for her. And it just felt really good that I didn't. Like many of my friends came back and said, but she could have done something, or she's, putting the sort of the blame back on her. And I didn't go there. And I think I would have in the past. And so that felt really good for me, just to be able to say, there's probably something going on. Like what is going on? What's going on for her? We don't know. We don't know her story. We haven't heard her story. And so I liked being in that position of not getting pulled in and under. And I think that's because Insight has done that. And I think, Sabina, what you said about curiosity is certainly that's my default, or I try to make it my default. It's not always my default. But I certainly try to go with curiosity. And like Sarah, as you said, like if we went back to her and just said, we hope you're doing okay. Anyways, I guess that's my story. And so I did have a story, I guess, to share. So thank you. I'm supposed to pick somebody, right? Yeah, I got that. Let's go. I'm swiping because I'm on my phone. How about Lee?
Okay, so what came to me was thinking about curiosity and hopes, and I had a couple come to me that was kind of a surprise, because they're a wealthy couple. He's a doctor, she's a psychiatrist. They run in very wealthy circles. And I am a mental health mediator, right? So they chose to come to me before a lawyer. And, my reputation is that I help people have peaceful divorces. And so I was just super curious about why it was that, why did you come to me? What are your hopes about this? And they talked to me about their hopes for their children, and the kinds of hope they had for their process, and the fears that they had about the influence of their families and their community. And their community had already talked to them each individually about, it's time to lawyer up, and we'll give you names, right? So, just very curious about why they're choosing a process that's different than what their families recommend and what their community recommends. And they really wanted to keep the integrity of their family. So, by continuing to ask them, what is it that you want? What is it you want for your family 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What is it that you want to tell your community and your family about the process? So we had a few really wonderful meetings, and they were able to talk to their families and talk to their communities, and, really, they were on the same page until they went to the lawyer mediator who I sent them to talk about their finances. And they completely became positional and had some reasons for being positional. So guess where they ended up was back in my office, right? And so just going back to where they started with their hopes and who they were and what they wanted down the line, and did they really want to get into this place? Also, I talked to each of them separately, and they told me about the things that were really getting in the way over the money. And so then we met again and they were able to tell each other and, just sort of revisit the hopes. And I just think that being so curious about people's hopes and helping them remember those things throughout, because there's never an easy divorce, right? So there's always something that gets in the way. And yeah, they settled on Thanksgiving their financial agreements and let me know right away. Right. And so, but I think those hopes are super important, and to be curious about them has made a big difference for me. This learning here at Insights just really takes me to a much deeper level of that. And I'm thankful for it.
Thank you so much, Lee. And who else who would you like to pass this on to?
Megan.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Yeah, I guess I really appreciated that story, and what the threads that are kind of coming together for me. So Lee, your story echoed, I think, Sarah's a bit. She was like, what do I want out of this? Kind of clarifying her hopes for the wrapping up production of this film. Right. And so being clear about our intended goods, about our hope for futures, about how we want things to go, begins to organize what we end up doing about it in order to get there. Right. And I think that's just so important to remember, just that visioning the future in a way that that puts order to what can be really, really foggy, particularly when we're threatened, by what other people are doing and how they're encroaching on us and getting in the way of our own objectives. I mean, I think it's a little bit different in policing and law enforcement, because we're really dealing with the threats. It's more immediate than long-term relational. I mean, there's definitely relations within the system that are really, really important, and offering that generosity, that space to wonder, what is it about this ticket that's got you so mad? We give 50 tickets like this a day and nobody comes in. They just pay them. They're fine. These are the rules. So why is it upsetting you? Oh, well, you weren't treated like a person. Nobody had a conversation with me about this. Nobody told me where to park. Nobody tried to help me, right? I can't pay this. My situation is insecure. So on the one hand, it's just really interesting to think. I think that kind of brings us to roles, right? I mean, it all kind of comes together, and it's fascinating how it does that. All these elements of our interiority and how we engage, how we pay attention to it, and also get curious about others, fit together in this really kind of dynamic whole way that is almost hard to wrap your head around. But as all of these stories are being told, it becomes very clear and also really really powerful. And by keeping all this in mind, the attending to ourselves, what's happening, what our valuing is, what our hopes are, what our worries are, what our threats are, what Allison was saying helps us not get pulled in to conflict behavior, not get pulled into dynamics that really aren't that healthy in the long run. I mean, that can ruin relationships or break us apart. So I think I love that tidbit as well, Allison. I think it really it's a really important one. So I'm very grateful to hear what everyone has offered so far.
And did a story come to mind for you?
No, I don't have a personal story.
Okay, and
Just
so
I'm fitting the pieces together. That's kind of what I like to do. Who wants to go next? Do I just have to pick somebody blindly? Jacinta?
Sure, thanks, Megan. I'm sorry I'm in the dark again, but I don't know. I love it. It's stormy outside and I've got the light in front of me. Anyway, thanks. Like wonderful stories, by the way. Thank you. I was thinking both with Sabina and Sarah, and then of course the theme just kept going, was that without the noticing and without the curiosity, we just carry on the path of our agenda. And then you can take a lot of this communication and conflict skills that we develop in our work and in our practice and in our studies and use them to manipulate people, right? Like there's such an interesting way that you can take skill and use it to pursue an agenda, and then you'll get nowhere. You'll just meet the resistance, and you're there, and you're in the pattern of conflict. And so what resonated really for me was how often I really start with the noticing, and then I can notice if I'm incurious or curious, and then as I become more curious, we have those moments like we do with our friends or our colleagues or our clients, where we go, oh, and we're wondering. And the wondering is, in Sarah, in your case, really, what is your hope for the better day the next day? Or Sabina, what, very specifically wanting to do a good job for this person as a representative of the municipality. And so I just find that I use threats and hopes a lot, right? Because the work I do is there's just so much threat that it can be manipulative if you're not truly noticing and you're not truly curious. You can be just pursuing an agenda. And I think that the experience that I've gotten just from listening to the stories really resonates with an experience I had last week. I had dinner with a friend that I've known, Allison. I mean, we've been friends since we were 15, and we hit a rough patch. So by the time we finally got together to have dinner, I knew in my heart that I was curious again. But had we had the conversation 3 months ago, I wouldn't have. I would have been there to make a point, pursue an agenda, get the apology, whatever the heck was going on. And so the experience was so much richer because I went in with a sense of curiosity and a clear intention. And I spent some time being very deliberate about verifying interpretation. And so being able to bring those aspects of insight to that difficult conversation made a huge difference to a very, very cherished friendship. So that was my week. Oh, Catherine, are you still awake? Do you want to share?
Sure, yes. What struck me about it, about both stories, was the genuineness of the person who was speaking and thinking of how to use the insight report. And then I also felt that when I'm able to behave in that way, with genuine curiosity and deep respect and really interested and wanting to know, I really don't need to go to insight because I have the resilience or I have the energy or the inner resources in order to do that. I suppose what I was listening out for was the deepening into threat and trying to identify the threatened value or valuing. Because I suppose that for me is the critical component of the transformation that insight offers. And while we got at what was important and what was needed, it came across to me more as like easy conversation, even though there was restraint being exercised in order to be amenable for a good outcome. So I appreciated hearing that, but what I was listening for was the I suppose was the insight wisdom. So I thought at the end of the day, I thought That's how a good person would behave. Where is the insight skill? And I suppose being able to identify that would be helpful for me. I don't have a story that comes to mind. And thank you for the stories we got.
And so Catherine, is there so are you thinking specifically about Sarah's story and where the skill is for insight? Where sort of what was the threat for Sarah?
I was thinking of both stories because
Yeah.
both stories became resolved very nicely.
Mhm.
But somewhere at the end of the day, I remember that insight isn't about solutions.
Mhm.
Insight is about a change of perspective. It's about transformation. It's about getting into the threatened value
Mhm.
so that people can open their perspectives that are closed and expand their views.
Mhm. I love that you've asked that question. And so let's kind of go to Sarah and then Sabina to respond.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this for a moment. I mean, I don't know if there was a particular, well, I think being able to step out of my role as producer into role of friend or person who cares about another person, being able to identify that feels like an insight skill to me. And being able to identify my own conflict behavior and then think really precisely about what the next steps are in order to disengage from that conflict behavior also feels like insight skill to me. I don't think that with this particular person in this instance that we really reached I suppose for me, the moment of expansion was just really understanding what was so difficult for her about this interaction, about the last several weeks for her, sort of like what was going on. And that made me feel like, or reminded me that my role as producer is also, like, I also have to make sure that I'm tending to people's human needs in addition to their professional needs. So I think I understood something more about my job in that moment. But is there something, Catherine, that you're curious about, like what was happening for her, or?
And I'll just also offer something in this too, just because what I heard, and this is where the owner of the story doesn't necessarily get, it's like this is like the person who tells the story and then the person who like receives the story. Because I heard so many skills going on in a self-awareness about what your threat was, Sarah, so that you could notice that there was some kind of conflict behavior, and that the threats that you were noticing, like how dare she, whatever your personal threats were, or she's not acting right, your overall concern, like as you hope for a better relation or focus on the relationship, the inverse is the relationship was at stake and the dire future that was there was a horrible day that could have resulted. So there was the threat there of the horrible day, which for you is more dire than the personal threat of who she was, who she was making you feel to be or who she was acting. And so I saw that. And then by you asking, like, are you okay? She then, which was like, what is your threat? Opened up to a whole bunch of threats that were relational. I'm not treated right. I am burnt out. I'm worried about this, which could have been a practical one. So that ability to then recognize that, by recognizing that there was some conflict behavior that the producer was demonstrating with this sort of barrage of accusations, that there would be some threat, and the ability to ask, are you okay? Or some kind of authentic curiosity then generated a whole bunch of insight for you that you could then respond to. So it's not so much that insight would avoid the solution, because we are always looking for options and being able to come to a better possibility, but that you were able to open those up in ways that would not have been possible had you just responded with your own threats. So I saw that interiority and the relationality within that system, which was quite constraining, as you talked about military and time and all of that context that generates those threats.
Yes, thank you for summing that up for me. That was good.
I just want to say something that I've been paying attention to lately, and that is that, of course, when you notice your own threat and your own defending conflict behavior, and you get an insight, and you then interact with the other person in a way that's deepening and open to relation and who they are, well, the conflict pattern doesn't persist. So that's transformative in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm noticing a lot in the work that I'm doing and with the divorcing families and also mediators who are trying to learn to do this work, it's to remember that sometimes the listening response is enough, that alone shifts things that allow you to actually solve something fairly quickly, that without the insight or the curiosity, without the noticing and the curiosity, and then the decision on what to do, you continue escalating the pattern of defending behavior. So, then it's just crap. And so that's that. I don't know if that helps either, but that's certainly what I saw happening in all the stories, actually. Thanks.
And we have about 6 minutes, so I'm just wondering, Jamie or Viev, what's come to mind for you?
Thank you. And thank you to all for your stories, and Sabina and Sarah for your years to launch us on this. I think, since we don't have much time, I think the thing that struck me in both of the two original stories was that moment when you made the move to an insight approach. I don't think that's, Sarah, you called it the slowing down, and Sabina, you just seem to naturally shift to it. Maybe you operate in that way all the time, but I'm curious about what that moment is, because it strikes me in my experience that often, I guess what Cheryl Picard calls attack, defend, if I'm attacked the way both of you were, it isn't all that easy to slow down. It isn't all that easy to say, well, I think I'll take a different attack here. I'll be curious about them rather than respond reactively. But once you do, everything that we've been talking about follows. But I'm talking about that moment where you decide to, I guess it is a decision, but it's also a decision based on awareness of yourself and where you are and how you can respond. And I wonder how those, for both of you, how those, what that moment was in the case of these stories, and how you made the shift rather than just reacting to this guy who's parked in the wrong place and is annoyed, or this, co-producer who falsely and irrationally accuses you of all this stuff.
I have to say, going back to law enforcement people traditionally being very certain, it's almost entertaining for me, because I know that they're expecting me to be certain, and then when I hit them with a question, they're like, oh, I was totally not expecting you to be so curious about me, about them. And so it's kind of rewarding and satisfying in a weird way. So I'm just waiting for my moment to ask a question. And yeah, then the whole dynamic usually changes.
So you're sort of a jester cop in a sense.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I think there's an element of it that's become habitual because insight offers such a reward. It feels bad to be in conflict. To me, it feels bad to be in conflict. It feels bad to be misunderstood or to feel like someone is attacking you. And so to have this option to transform what's happening is really powerful. And after learning about it and seeing it work a few times, being able to sort of to try it and see what the possibilities are very quickly there's this sort of it's a light bulb that goes off in my head of like, oh, this feels bad. I know what I can try to make it feel better. It feels very reward response oriented.
Say it again.
So it's become habitual in some way for both of you, based on your either interpersonal or your role, your professional roles. That's really interesting. Cool.
I see Lee, and then we can go over to Viev.
I was just thinking about the words authentic curiosity. I mean, because we all want connection, right? And that's the most important thing, I think. And when I think we connect with others and our curiosity is truly authentic and the other person feels it, that's the beginning of the change. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone. I have a lot of thoughts. One of them was just around what we've been talking about, brought up that phrase around like either the narrative having you or you having the narrative. And just that move that we're talking about in terms of like being swept up or being, caught and reacting and just kind of getting into this attack defend or just some kind of cycle that's you being like you're being taken for a ride by the whole by the narrative. And so what does it take? Practice and attentiveness and reflexivity to sort of say, oh, I can be both in relationship to this narrative, and I can even now have some authority over it, autonomy in it, all of those things. So I love that expression, and I think about it often. And the thing I wanted to wonder about, not now, but to put out on the table for us as the EC community to think about is, I've been thinking a lot about intention versus impact, or intention and impact. And some of the times I've gotten really caught in, in saying, oh, I'm going to be really reflective and I'm going to really think about this and my intention is, and then act from that intention, act from that hope for a future, act from that. And the impact is so dramatically different. And then even with my curiosity about the other person, even with a curiosity around, what's at stake and what's so threatening, it's like, I'd love to have a conversation with insight practitioners and methodologists sometime to say, can we think about this in insight terms? And can we wonder about how to really get in there and think about what that dynamic is and how to respond to it. I'm sure there's lots to be said. So that's what really came to my mind as I was listening to this. And thank you, Sabina and Sarah, really for launching us and talking so beautifully.
So as we come to our hour of close, so that's a lovely way of sort of launching another kind of question forward. Catherine, I just wanted to sort of close with you, like sort of circle back to you if there was anything else that you wanted to sort of say as well around where your curiosity might be to take us into another conversation another time. And you'll just have to unmute.
Thank you. My curiosity is around the magic moment, the expansion that happens. As Viv was just saying, when somebody is in a reactive attack defend, unable to be reflective, unable to go within, what then are the tools that can be used that actually give you the shift? That's my key interest in precipitating insight.
What a great, another great question for launching us into another year, because we're closing off this year with this session. And there has been there's been the 2022 calendar that has been launched thanks to Megan. And so the next event is on January the 10th, and it will be storytelling with Chook. And so please go to the website and check that out and register. And because it's again going to be just it's another event of story and reflection. And so as we kind of close out this year and go into the solstice, is there anything else to be said? Megan, is there anything you'd like to say sort of on behalf of the EC community? Wonderful. Then I'll just wish you kind of a bon voyage through the next phase, and see you on the other side of the year.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you to you both, Sabina and Sarah.